Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose at the Wharf. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're delighted to be hosting educator and civil rights activist Melissa Brown. She's here to talk about her new book, Another Sojourner Looking for Truth, My Journey from Civil Rights to Black Power and Beyond. 61 years ago, Millicent became the lead plaintiff in quite a well-known NAACP-sponsored lawsuit to desegregate the Charleston public schools. And she hasn't stopped fighting for civil rights since. Born into an activist household during the height of the civil rights movement, her dad was a prominent member of the NAACP's local branch. Millicent eventually went on to college and some years of community work before earning a PhD in history. She wrote her thesis on the history of civil rights activism in Charleston during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Then she spent a career in academia, teaching at Bennett College, Guilford College, North Carolina A&T State University, and Claflin University. All the while, she continued to advocate in various ways for systemic change for marginalized people and for improvements in exploited neighborhoods and communities of color. Nowadays, she consults with museums, historical sites, and organizations about social justice initiatives. In her book, Millicent shares her story about a life of activism in civil rights, in the civil rights movement. As she says in the preface, the story in broad terms is essentially one of a search for answers to the most important question of her lifetime, namely, what does freedom look like in the United States for Black people like her? Her experiences, as she says, constitute a model of enduring passion for and insistence on truth-telling, transparency, personal engagement, and high ideals about what it means to function as a full citizen and human being. In conversation with Millicent, we're very fortunate to have James Counts Early, himself a longtime advocate and supporter of cultural diversity and equity issues in the nation's public cultural and educational institutions. For many years, he worked at the Smithsonian Institution in various positions, including as Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service. Please join me in welcoming Millicent Brown and James Early.
Good evening. And happy International Workers' Day.
Yeah,
I hope that holds resonance for all of you. I think it has a particular universal intersection with the narrative of this extraordinary book, of which I'm especially pleased to have been asked to facilitate an exchange with Millicent Brown and to facilitate the exchange that we will have with you with regard to your questions, your observations, and your commentary. So it will be a full engagement of we all this evening, which I think is very much in concert with this book, Another Sojourner Looking for Truth, Millicent Brown. My being especially pleased to be here is that our paths crossed as children of U.S. legal, social, cultural segregation at a time when we sitting here this evening would not be able to sit together. We perhaps would not have been able to even come into this general area, except that some of us would have been consumers, voyeurs of what was going on in the wharf, and others of us would have been working in the kitchen or the fishmongers, cutting up the fish and leaving perhaps before sundown, but certainly not with the income to participate in this magnificent environment that Politics and Prose now has a footprint in. My being especially pleased to engage with Millicent is because our paths have crossed not only as children of segregation. My name actually appears in the book, I found very interesting and excitedly. As young adults at Spelman College and Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, our paths cross. And then in later years, my partner, friend, wife of 55 years altogether, Miriam Stewart Early here, where I don't know if you recall this, but you were in the Spelman College dance group for a short while as she and I were trying to figure if she knew you. But what distinguishes, I think, our common history as children of that era, and now in our 70s, is that some of us come from a familial, community, social, political, conscious environment, where as youngsters, we are socialized not simply as individuals and the dilemmas that individuals have to deal with which this book deals a lot with, but we are also socialized to engage the aspirations, the challenges, the possibilities within our families and with our communities. In our particular racial case here in the United States, race people, which goes well beyond the notion of the individual or the notion of a memoir simply as an individual expression, although there is a powerful individual story here of Dr. Millicent Brown, but that individual story really is interconnected with family, community, nation, the globe, the rhythms and goals of freedom. And I would conclude my opening remarks before going to Millicent to say that I hope it is a book that you will get not only to see the personal story, which will be resonant for all of us, because we have all been young people dealing with those interior voices, those challenges about what family expects, what we think community expects. But we have not all come from backgrounds, and this is not merely a racial question, of where there is a consciousness about where you fit and what your responsibility is bigger than your own individual aspiration. And therein, I hope that you will not only purchase this book, but you will make sure that a younger generation of high school students who are now very conscious and active, of college students that we're seeing on college campuses, not only across the United States today, but literally now across the world, who are grappling with major humanistic issues of all kinds, that you will encourage them to look at this narrative, because I think it will be a guide to see what their connection is to the humanity out of which Millicent Brown comes, but it also will help them to think through the distinct and particular issues that they are facing today. So let us begin with this title, Another Sojourner Looking for Truth. I sense the dilemma that you dealt with in coming to this.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really do want to talk about the title for a few minutes. It's not my original title. And as we were going through the process of completing the book, both my informal and formal editors, a few other readers that perused it said, nah, you're not capturing what all the essays are about, you know, and your title is just about maybe 2 or 3. You need to go back to the drawing board on this. And I argued and I resisted for a while. And then I said, okay, that makes sense. What is really, really happening with these essays? And I said, another. Very, very important word. While I am identified, and there are several people from my hometown that are here tonight, I'm identified in South Carolina with the desegregation case of 1963 that ultimately desegged the public schools of South Carolina. That's 9 years after Brown versus Board of Ed in Topeka, Kansas, folks, okay? I call that the big brown, I'm the little brown, okay? I have struggled for years to always say to people the case was Millicent Brown et al. There were 10 other students that were a part of that lawsuit. And it's understandable that the chief plaintiff would be the one that's often, referred to. But year after year, every time I talk, I say, people, you've got to understand there were other folks. And you cannot just, relegate them to the background like that. Because first of all, you're putting too much weight on my shoulders, and you're putting too much notoriety, celebrity, on this one name. And so another was about making that point that not only with that particular case, but with all the struggles going on in the South, in the North, in the United States, around the world, that we grapple with this notion of lots of other people are out there doing this hard work. And let's never forget that. So another, I got a little corny, the Sojourner truth thing. I admit that, okay. But then I said, but the truth is, the book is about a sojourn. It's about a physical one. It's about changing locations, starting in Charleston, South Carolina, and then moving on to other places. A real sojourn. And as it turns out, ending up at the end back in Charleston. But so the sojourner kind of made sense to me, okay? But the word looking also was important to me. I started to say, what was the word I was going to use? Seeking. And I said, no, when you seek something, you kind of know where you're going. I didn't, a lot of the time. I did not have the specific thing that I was seeking. Looking was a better choice of words because it really captured for me the essence of staying open, both your eyes, your heart, your intellect, but just looking at what is going on and taking it in and grappling with it. And that was certainly what my process was. So it was another sojourner, one of many, but just not saying that I had all the answers. I just was trying to, what would now sometimes be called being woke, Well, that was the phrase. But, I was looking for answers because ultimately the question, and this is where the truth comes in, I just want to know how black folks going to get to be free in America. I mean, that's really what it was all about. It was, what are these ways that we are going to try to find a way to clean up this mess? So with that, we end up with another sojourner looking for truth. Truth is a funny word to use. I promise you that. I use the word truth in terms of something that is really quite honest, quite visible, and that we have to grapple with. And I know people know that we have different perspectives on what is right, wrong. I'm not so sure. I think when we talk about truth, we're talking about that which actually is, that which actually happened, is happening. And I don't think you can change that, but so much. You can like it or not like it. You can agree or disagree. But what they say about the facts are the facts, folks. So that's where my title came from.
So in my introductory comments, I used two terms very intentionally. I alluded to the internal dilemma, looking internally.
Yeah.
And that being connected, in this case, to your family legacy. And that one of the things you talk about at the outset is what you thought originally of entitling this book, which hits at the heart of a subject that we deal with today in the United States, the phenomena having always been there, but the terminology being new, and that's colorism.
Colorism.
Light, bright,
Light, bright.
almost
My
white.
original title was going to be Light, Bright, and Damn Near.
Why?
It's an expression, if some of you aren't familiar with it, but it's an expression particularly in the Black community that says when you are of this hue, this skin color, you know, you're light, bright, and damn near white. And tragically, as a repercussion of the insidiousness of white supremacy in so many communities throughout this country. The lighter you are, the closer you are to being white, carried with it, you know, a lot of agency. And then I'm from Charleston, a city that has a long history of coming out of human bondage and enslavement of African people, for sure. This whole idea that, you know, we had a lot of miscegenation. We got folks in Charleston and New Orleans and Richmond and DC too. We're not the only place, but Charleston particularly, where a lot of advantages given to people who were light, bright, and damn near. Not so many advantages that took us outside of the trappings of segregation. We were still, I don't care how late you were, you know, you were not going to sit downstairs in the movie theater, right? Okay, so it's not like you just free to be all you can be kind of thing. But it's a notion that the breaking up of people, in many ways, the continuation of the destruction of a people by segregating people by both color and class. And that was where I was going at first. And it's, you know, I actually named my, I created, anticipating this book was going to be written about 15 years ago, I actually said, I'm going to name the book, whenever I write it, Light, Bright, and Damn Near. And I named my consulting LLC Light, Bright, because that was going to be some free, early advertising for the book. I still got the business cards, y'all, with Light Bright on it, but I didn't get to write the book, you know. So this thing has been just out there for a while, you know. But it's a notion. I don't in any way purport that I'm doing a full analysis of colorism. It's a very, very intricate notion to talk about. But it comes up, because it's about what privileges get given to people because of skin color. And let me just add right now, James, we're not talking about the way white people refer to Black folks. We're talking about within the Black community itself. And it's not either or, it's really both, it's both. But I'm just saying the Black community has always grappled with it, continues to grapple with it, sadly. And I did want to speak to some of that phenomenon and how confusing it was for me.
I remember in my late teens, early 20s, of hearing the phrase, the Charleston Black Blue Buds, and not really having an understanding of the deeper sociological implications of that within the Black community. The first part of your book really gives a rich history of your family, the self-consciousness about being a responsible citizenry, and this intersection of complexion and material circumstance, but everybody was on the same side of the track. You couldn't get to the other side of the track.
Still over there.
And out of that family background, you spoke about the Little Brown case of setting the precedent of breaking segregation in education, which your family talked about, which many Black families And no doubt many white working class families talked about is, if you get an education, you've got a base. Would you give us some sense of that sociology and how your family intersected with the rest of Charlestonians?
Right now. Okay,
Please.
you know, it's sitting in this room with me. My neighbors, you know, all these folks I grew up with and everything. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Thank you. My father was very active locally as local president of the NAACP for many years, and then went on to become state president for even more years after that. So I am born into a household that's really very conscious of having to change society. But he's of the era that the generation prior to mine, where we thought we knew what was going to make this thing change. If you follow the rules, get educated, do really well, excel, you know, things are going to work for you, you know. And for many, many decades, some of that's true, you know, certainly after World War II. You know, where certain kinds of federal legislation enables Black folks to become a little bit more a part of this nation on a little bit more of an equal footing. And so this idea of, you know, getting educated, you might get hired, you really might get hired, whether it's the post office or the federal government, the Navy Yard in Charleston, you know. But the point was, education was the answer. Because once we convinced white folks that we really were, you know, smart and capable, then policies were going to change. And so I grew up with that. My father believed in that, and so did most of the folks, again, my home folks here. And those of you who maybe aren't from Charleston, but I think you can relate to this. The point is, education is the key. And then we started finding out that a bunch of us had a bunch of education, and it was not turning things around the way we had thought and believed. And so that begins for those of us who are growing up and growing into maturity in the 60s. This whole idea of, if it's not education, then what is it? You know, what are the other unasked questions that we've not been grappling with? And that is sort of the way the book sort of just starts unwinding, that it's not that simple. Let me just mention something that happened very recently. I was asked to speak to a group of young people in a program, a mentoring program that was being done in Charleston. And a really wonderful, astute, I think junior in high school, young Black guy gets up, and he has been asked to share with his cohorts in this program how he wants them to sign this pledge that they've all been asked to sign, talking about how they are going to dismantle white supremacy. And so he goes on to say, in my presence, how that is why he is very careful whenever he talks to a policeman. And he does not wear saggy pants. And he makes sure that he presents himself in that acceptable way. And I almost choked. I said to the people who ran the program, that boy's gonna get himself killed. Because he is, first of all, taking on the responsibility that he can change white supremacy. That's the first mistake, okay? But more importantly, he's thinking that if he walks right, dresses right, acts right, you know, he's safe. And I had to remind the young man, beautiful young man, I said, When Clemente Pinckney was killed in Emmanuel, state senator, minister, I said, he wasn't wearing baggy pants. So please try not to oversimplify this thing. Do we all need to work to challenge white supremacy? Of course we do. But for you to take on that responsibility and think that you, I said, oh my God, what's the boy's name that got killed? Well, there's so many. No. Trayvon, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of Trayvon. Yeah, I mean, the list is so long, but I was especially talking about young people. I said, Trayvon wasn't doing anything wrong. Again, I'm from Charleston, where Walter Scott got shot 8 times, in the back. So let's be very cautious teaching young people, and I believe in carrying yourself in a decent manner. I believe in dressing appropriately. I'm all down with that. I was taught that. All of us were, okay? We present ourselves in a way to demand respect. But for you to think that that is going to save you is not only foolish, but it's dangerous. And I just said to the organizers, please invite me back. Let me talk to these children. Don't let this go out there like that. You mean well, but you're sending a message that is much more complex than that. And I fear for people who still believe that. Now, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yes, you did, and it leads to
where that started.
So when you purchased this book, one of the really uplifting things for me was to go back and to look at the sociology of a Black community through the eyes and voices of a Black family connected to other families who were in their own way, if I might take some license, on their own sojourn looking for truth. The people who came through your home, Marguerite Belafonte, first married to Harry Belafonte, whom we, even to put it that way, does not qualify her in the first instance of who she was in the civil rights movement. Name some of the other people who just sort of ordinarily came through your house that we now know as icons because they were on their common sojourn in the search for freedom.
It started with people like Gloucester Current and Roy Wilkins with the NAACP. Then it was Thurgood Marshall. Then it was later to be Judge Constance Baker Motley, Marguerite Belafonte, and it really does go on and on. These people were coming. Our home was a centerpiece for people to stay safely. My friend from Charleston, Deborah Mechanic, who's here with me, was just talking about the increased attention being paid to the Green Book. And this whole notion of people having to figure out where was a safe place to stay. And so folks like that were not able to go to the big hotels.
Not sure everybody knows what the Green Book is.
Oh, okay. Green Book was a compilation put together as early as the 40s. Maybe the late 30s and 40s, but it was a book that was actually published that was a guidebook for Black travelers in the South, telling you here are safe spaces, here is a place that you will be able to stay. You can eat here. You don't have to go to the back door or whatever. But it was really a very necessary tool for traveling in some very unfriendly areas. And while we were talking a little while ago that in many ways, sadly, we may be getting back to that because folks still have to watch where they are, perhaps for somewhat different reasons, but certainly it does harken back to the days when people needed to be alerted that these are not communities that welcome you. And so that was what the Green Book was like. And at this time, Thurgood Marshall could not stay at the biggest hotel in Charleston, So he stayed with us on many occasions, And so that does something to you as a child, and then as I got older and then began to understand who these people were, you know, oh yeah, I know Connie, I know Thurgood, you know, and it's like it just became a part. But more importantly, the fact that they have notoriety and they're almost iconic. Also, there was this introduction to me that people who were doing this hard work of trying to bring about social change, they were some regular people, you know, they were some regular people. And of course, you know, we're elevating, you know, this is somebody who is this and that and everything, and that's all fine. I believe in giving credit where it's due. But as a child and as a young person, it really struck home that the folks that are doing this work have families. I'm on the phone talking to somebody's children, you know, because I'm assuring them that your mama's okay. She's right here with us and she's doing okay, you know, and she wants you to say hello to me. And so I'm talking to folks and everything. It's like there was just this this normality to it. And so I think I got really turned on to this hard work we call working for social justice was also being done by regular people. Hard work being done, but by regular people.
There's this fascinating passage, I think, connected to that very fine way that you put it, normalized, that you were not the original first name plaintiff. It was your sister and your father. Tell us about what happened and how you moved into that mix.
Thank you. I've been a college professor for a long time, and I usually just yell, and I don't have mics, you know, so forgive me for that. Right after Brown versus Board of Ed in 1954, efforts got made in our community and in communities all over to try to get states to comply. Well, South Carolina, because South Carolina is South Carolina, said, hell no. We ain't doing nothing. we ain't changing nothing. And they just ignored Brown versus Board for many years. My sister Minerva was one of the original plaintiffs in this case. Well, Minerva gets to be a senior in high school. Nothing has changed. And so a device that was being used in many states was we drag it out, we drag it out, we drag it out until the plaintiff either drops out, gets tired, or in my sister's case, graduates. And then the case becomes moot. And then you have to start with a new plaintiff all over again, all through the appeal process. You know, it was a delaying tactic. And South Carolina got real good at that. And so Minerva becomes a senior. And even if she had won the case, who was going to transfer somebody in the middle of the school year? So they claimed that the case was moot, and my father went down to the courthouse, had somebody who I do not know who it was, but some friend down at the courthouse switched Minerva's name to Millicent. And my father, from that point on, always called me the ace up his sleeve. He had another daughter that he could then put in the case. It stayed in my name for 3 more years.
Okay, let's skip forward to another period so that we can now open it up in a minute. See if I can squeeze in at least one more question and then open it up for your questions, commentary.
I don't give short answers, I'm sorry.
And as you can see, nor do I give short introductions. So your sojourn then takes you beyond Charleston to Emerson College up in Boston, a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
Then back around, I think, to Charleston, and then to Atlanta.
Yeah.
At the time that I'm in Atlanta, I go to Morehouse College in 1965. Not so incidentally, I had my degree suspended in 1969 for a takeover. I think about that's going on now. I mention that not as a merely personal reference, but as a context in which you engage Sisters in Blackness at Spelman College, and you come into the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, perhaps the most important youth movement in the history of this country that still has much resonance and intersection with young people of all racial backgrounds today. Would you take us through that period into Black Power and how your views change? And
now you're gonna make these people not buy this book now, James. I'm sorry, I can't. The point being that I leave South Carolina, naive about a lot of things. I'm really into NAACP, because that's the answer. We're just going to be passive, and we're going to stick with the legalities, and we're going to stay in the courts, and we're going to change this country. This country is going to see us for the beautiful people that we are, all of that. And I go up to Boston. I'm a little jaded by this time because high school was not real great. I'll be very honest with you. And so I go up to Boston, and I never got called nigger that many times as I had in Boston, as I, when I was in South Carolina. And so I'm shattered. It's like I thought I had gone to freedom. And I find out my dad had an expression he had been using in our house for years. And, we heard it, but we don't listen to everything Daddy says, But he used to say, the South is anything below Canada. And I didn't believe him until I went to Boston. And then I realized, this is not a Charleston problem. This is not a South Carolina problem. This is a national problem. And so some of that NAACP thinking was just losing favor. It was just losing favor. And I'm talking about 1966, 67. The whole nation, young people and old, are really just challenging, We've got to find some other ways to get people to pay attention because the legal angle is just so slow. And it's not affecting but so many people. Yeah, I might get to go to Rivers. Didn't you end up going to Rivers, Paul? Chris did, her sister, yeah. Somebody gets hired. There's going to be a first Black city councilman, Things are changing a little bit. But when we talk about true systemic change, it's still just a drop in the bucket here, there, and everywhere. So we're understanding this. We're reading, El-Haj Malik al-Shabazz, otherwise known as Malcolm X. We're beginning to go back to African history. We're finding that this ain't new stuff. This stuff has been written but ignored. These African scholars have been talking about, the greatness of Africa for a long time. We didn't know it, And so you're getting exposed to this, and it's just this grappling with what is the right question, much less what's the right answer. And so I do go to Boston. I'm disenchanted, and I'm going to go to a Black school. And several of us in this room have another friend who's not here with us, Harriet, said, you looking for a Black school, you going to Spelman? Spelman is a wonderful school, but Spelman is known, as was Morehouse, for the Black elite. So I go to Spelman looking for, I'm going to be in the Black activist. There were 9 women in this group called Sisters in Blackness, okay? And these are the activists, 9 of us on the whole campus, okay? So it's like, then I'm like, I'm blown out. It's like I'm here to really delve deeply into my African consciousness, And it's like, it ain't here either. And there are some other issues that go on too, I get disenchanted and just drop out. I decide the academic route is not answering the questions I have. And I joined SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And then I'll let y'all read about the rest of that.
So as I turn it over to you, let me just say that this sojourn with Millicent Brown has not stopped.
No.
As she concludes the book, it's an extraordinary number of civic interactions, not only with Black American groups, not only with elderly people like us, younger generations, Latinos, women, LGBTQ, across the racial ethnic lines. So that sojourn is still going on in her life. Amazing to me how active she is. Miriam and I just visited her recently for a few hours on James Island, which is across the bridge from Charleston. And as I was concluding the book, I thought, how is she still on this sojourn? Well, she's still on it at a higher level, and a larger number of people of civic engagement, like all of us who are the changers. Now with that, let me open it up. You will not have the privilege that I've had. You have 1 minute to raise your question, your comment, and she is also inviting critiques of anything that has been said.
Yes.
So, did I see your hand, ma'am?
Right.
Oh, you, I'm sorry, you're, listen. All right, James, you're through.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for being here today. My name is Nathan, and I'm a 2021 graduate of Montgomery College here in the Washington, D.C. area. Yeah. I'm hoping to study education and teach history with an emphasis on civil rights history. And what I was wondering is I found it meaningful reading about Judge Matthew Perry, who later became the first African-American federal judge, if I'm remembering correctly. And
well, in South Carolina.
In South Carolina. Yes. What I was wondering, there were two things I was wondering. I was wondering, what would you say your most powerful memory of Judge Perry was? And also, I was curious if your father and your family had the chance to meet Judge Julius Wedis Waring.
Judge Waring?
Judge Waring, yes.
J. Waities Waring is how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Thank you.
My father knew Judge Waring. I was quite young when Judge Waring was literally run out of Charleston. A jurist, a white jurist with a very aristocratic background who stepped out and decided on some major cases, including stopping the Democratic Party from being a private club, opening it up so that blacks could vote in the primary. He's involved with a number of major decisions, and got run out of town for doing so, literally. He's sort of being resurrected now with some honor, but folks hated him in Charleston because he had the nerve to go against his grain, and he did. And I want you to know that about him, because I firmly believe that we got to understand the importance of stepping outside our comfort zone, all of us, because he's a prime example of it. And yes, to answer your question, my father certainly did know and admired very much and counted on his wise counsel. What was that first one?
About Judge Perry.
Matthew J. Perry, first I was in love with him, first of all. He was drop dead gorgeous. Yeah, I mean, he really was, and he had this booming voice, He was really quite a character. But he was my lawyer. He was the lawyer for the 3 students who desegregated the University of South Carolina, which has just been honored literally a week ago with a statue to those first 3 students. My fondest memory of him would just be him being at our house and talking to me as if I were an adult. He did not talk down to me. He just kind of saw me, and I don't know. It's something about, again, that being genuine and he was humble, and I have that wonderful memory of him. I say some other things about him in the book, though, but that's my fondest memory. Thank you. You're Nathan?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hi, Millicent. You and I followed a similar track, although I was 70 miles inland from you.
In Orangeburg?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The young man who was so strong about what he was going to do,
Yeah.
I think we should be careful not to kill that motivation.
For sure.
I do recall, and I'm sure you do too, that, sorry I can't remember the young man's name, but a young man was killed in Tuskegee while we were in the midst of the movement. And that was the day that your cousin TK came and said to me,
Yeah.
we're vulnerable too.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it made us, okay. But it didn't make us stop.
No.
And so we have to be careful when we talk to that young man, because we want him to do, like you said, that students are doing now, is have the verve to go out there and say, I'm going to risk something. I'm going to risk me, I'm going to risk my future, and I'm going to do it for a greater cause. Yeah. That's not naivete, that's courage.
Yeah.
And
No, I would agree with that.
And the other thing related to that is you mentioned that, the colorism and the privilege thing. I didn't get to integrate a school in Orangeburg, because Orangeburg was years behind Charleston in integrating. Mm-hmm. But I got sent away purportedly to integrate a Northern Catholic school, which was just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But that's something that I think June Manning kind of documents in her book about how hard Black people worked to be educated in South Carolina. Because, and I think although it wasn't the ticket, it was necessary but not sufficient. And as I went away to boarding school, I remember my dad saying to me that summer when we were on the picket lines, he says, you see those kids that are marching with you? They are never gonna have the benefit that you get from going forward. Don't forget that. So I think it's really important, because it is all related. Mm-hmm. The privilege, the colorism, and the courage of people who had everything to lose and very little to gain.
No, I thank you for that. Out of my many years of teaching, and I'm not in any way negating anything that you just said, I'm just going to add on to it. I was appalled when I was teaching at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it was my first teaching position. And this beautiful young Black woman comes up to me and says, Dr. Brown, when you talk about your experiences in an all-Black school, and then you tell us about going into a predominantly white school, she says, we think ghetto. And I said, huh? She says, the very phrase all Black had over time become associated with inferiority and then ghetto. And I said, I went back to the drawing board and I redid my syllabus and I said, I'm doing something wrong. I have got to switch because I had forgotten the age difference and that the people I was teaching had not known all Black schools in the same vein. So if it was all Black, it must have been inferior. And so I had to hearken back to the pre-integration days and say, hold it. While we were lacking in resources, believe me, but do not equate that with the lack of excellence. And you cannot separate that out. So I say to you, of course we know education is important, but education was important before integration too. See, and I get concerned when I don't hear a deeper understanding, because I talk back to my colleagues and say, y'all, we not teaching this civil rights stuff correctly. We've left something out. The youngsters, be they white or Black, think that we desegregated so we could be with white kids. because that's the only way we're going to get a good education. You know, I said, now that is not only so wrong, that's dangerous and it's harmful. It's harmful to the psyche. We got to clean it up. Be careful when you discuss desegregation. Don't make it look as if, ooh, and now, you know, we've arrived, you know? And so we just have to be very cautious with our words, and that's what I was getting at. Let's just make sure we don't oversimplify, because the belief in quality education has been a part of many Black communities from forever. Would y'all agree with that? You know, yeah. But that's the kind of nuance that I just found lacking. You know, we have people today, middle-class Black folks, that are so happy that their child is the only one. You know, we've gotten confused with it. You know, what's so big about, I'm the only one at Ashley Hall or whatever, you know. We've missed something in our interpretation. I got to say this. I often tell people, remember, when those tax monies did not have, Black tax money went for the Black schools and white tax money went for the white schools. It didn't work like that. All the tax money went into the same pot. It's just we didn't get our share. And so I add to this struggle for desegregation, the struggle for quality education, blah, 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 I add the factor that it's also about I'm a tax-paying citizen. And there were Black folks who are struggling to simply get that which we have contributed to. That really isn't about even race. That's about, I paid my money. The man that came to my house and told my father, Joe, I just got my tax bill. I didn't realize that I was paying for the municipal golf course. And so my father said, yeah, Jack, you are. It comes out of your property taxes. And he had been driving usually up to almost Myrtle Beach, which is, like 100 miles away, to play golf. And it's like, and it's the black golf course, right? And so it's like, let's make sure if we're going to talk about school integration or desegregation or any other kind of public access, let's just remind people that it's also based on the economics. We put money into this system, and it was money that we wanted to see. And y'all remember those books we used to get that were scratched out because the white kids had them first, and we used to get them afterwards, So anyway, it's just an expanded thing, nuance. She was adding nuance to it as well. We cannot oversimplify this notion of changing society. It wasn't simple, it is not simple, but let's not draw comfort by trying to kind of make it be, well, this happened and there was King, and then after King there was, the civil rights, this, and then we got along. Let's make sure we keep complicating the whole discussion, if you will. Okay,
No, you're good.
Get carried away.
No, you're good. You're good.
I don't get to DC but so often, y'all. I'm just gonna.
Hi, my name is Kinshasha Holman Conwell, and I only have 20 questions. Is that okay? Good.
It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you, my love. The problem with asking you a question is when you think of the question, then you say 20 more things. You're like, oh my God, but my question. So I'm going to boil it down to a few simple questions because I can't handle this. It's too brilliant. One, have you done an oral history? Okay, 1A, where is it? And 1B, if you haven't, please let's talk about where you can do it. 2, I know you just finished this, but when is your next book? Because you have done so much in this book, but I'm going to ask you a real question, which is, how often are people surprised that as young and vivacious as you are, that you actually lived in an era of segregation? I was once asked that by a colleague, and I was so flattered Philippa Mensadon, and the lovely, lovely Miriam. I want to be her if I ever grow up. So, and Deborah. A friend that I was with at the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, where I worked until 5 minutes ago, said, "Oh, Kinshasa, you weren't alive during segregation." And I said, "You're so sweet." But do many people wonder if it's possible that someone as young as you could have lived in that period of segregation?
Fascinating questions.
I have never had anybody tell me I don't believe you that old, okay? So I really have not had that. I have not had that experience. So, maybe one day I will. But thank you so much anyway. Yeah, I'm 75 years old, okay? It has come up before about a follow-up to this book, I consider myself to be a history and museum consultant. I'm working with the Charleston Museum. The Charleston Museum decided that they are going to take their narrative beyond the Civil War. They are actually going to do it. They're going to bring it into the 20th century. So I'm working with them on expanding, especially a part of a permanent exhibit on civil rights, and locally especially. So as opposed to following up with the book, I really do like to make myself available to just be a questioner, be another eye at the table when some of the plantations are trying to get their acts together, How do they interpret the slave experience? How do they interpret, the Black experience in Charleston? So that's probably the route I will be taking for the most part, yeah. I've done a couple to 3 of them in different places. Some is at the University of South Carolina. I guess the most expansive one is at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture, yeah, which is a part of the College of Charleston.
Less than halfway through reading this book, I said to her that your narrative voice, your storytelling voice, well beyond the chronology of events, but the internal reflections, always maintaining an outward connection of how to move forward even as she was facing these internal dilemmas. And there are passages, I've been trying to figure out if there's a literary terminology for it, of some internal dialogue that she places in the book, some questions to herself, that I think would make a fascinating audiobook that the former founding deputy director of the Smithsonian National African American Museum of History and Culture, Kinshasa Holman, might work with the publisher in doing an audio.
I'm asking that question because people want. I have a nephew that said he might not read the book, but he'd listen to it if it was an audio book. So So I really do hope that will happen. We'll have to talk, Kinshasa. We really do. Yeah.
All right, this will be our final question.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mel Foote. I work on Africa. My whole career has been U.S.-Africa relations. It's tied to that. I have a lot of questions, but I only can ask one. I know how James is. My question has to do with the debate between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington on the way forward for Black people. And what does this say to us going forward? It's just always good to be thinking about where we go from this. But what's your take on that?
My take kind of goes back to this young man who says he wants to go into the classroom and teach. My take is, first, let us allow Black people to have multiple voices. Let us not demand that we are on the same page, That's the beauty for me. It's a conflict for sure, but it's really about why must we insist that everybody thinks it's the same route? Freedom is a very, very nebulous thing. And by coming up in Charleston, we had, and there were many communities. You had, what are some of the schools, the schools here in Charleston, in D.C.? Dunbar High School and everything. We had an institution called the Avery Normal Institute. And it was a private school. It was a very important school that eventually became public and merged with what is still an existing all-black public school. My father was a graduate. My father used to take us there after church, and we would go and he would say, "This is where I went to school. Now you see down there, that's where Mr. Boone taught carpentry. And that's where I took my carpentry class." "You really?" "Yeah." And he said, "See up there? Now, that's where Miss somebody or another taught Latin and Greek." And it was the same school, because there was this understanding that you can have different career paths, but you will respect whether it's the carpenter, the contractor, the painter, the welder, the iron worker, will get the same amount of respect as the person who is teaching math, science, Latin, Greek. And see, that kind of experience, I just think that's what we do in resolving this issue of where to go. We've got to understand the respect, the regard. This is May 1st. We got to respect workers. They exist. We got to understand why they need to be respected, and not think that just education and getting to be a doctor or a lawyer is the way to go. We've got to find a way to offer the humanity to people in whatever pathway they're taking. I hope that satisfies you in some way.
Thank you, Millicent Brown.
I mean, we could debate the two, but, I believe somehow that there is a conjoining of that. I really do, somehow. Yeah.
Thank you, Millicent Brown, for bringing this wonderful memoir to us. And I'm so pleased that we are intersecting again on our continuing road to truth and freedom, which now involves even a broader community of people who have their own searches.
That's right.
And who intersect much with us. And thanks to Politics and Prose for hosting this, and we look forward to your next events.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.